Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema. Exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. The Thoth deck is one of the most famous and influential tarot decks ever put together, and the artist behind its explosively energetic and colorful cards was Lady Frieda Harris, a longtime friend and collaborator of Aleister Crowley. We'll pay homage to this artist, author, and mystic as Rosemary Stehlik and I continue our look at women of the occult. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love under will.
Welcome back, Rosemary.
Thank you for having me again.
So today we're going to discuss the life and times of Lady Frieda Harris.
Indeed.
She's famous particularly for having created the Thoth tarot deck. Mm-hmm. She's the artist behind that deck. I think that's like the biggest thing that she's famous for.
It is very much, in my opinion, the opus of her work. Because, not to say that she didn't have a deep devotion to the fine arts before, but she even expressed to Crowley at one point that the work that they were doing together was the realization of an art form from within herself that she was striving to manifest for years. Mm-hmm. And beforehand, she very much identified as a fine artist who did like whimsical folktale style books. Mm-hmm. She identified with the Surrealist movement, so she had a pseudonym for herself of Jesus Chutney. That I suppose many women at the time felt compelled to hide behind a sort of masculinized archetype of themselves in order to have more free movement within circles that were very much dominated by a lot more of an elite male gender.
But she couldn't help having her tongue firmly in cheek when coming up with that one, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So there was the Victorian whimsy that came through with her. She was a feisty, fiery, yet complex, demure Victorian woman. Upper class, of course, being the wife of a politician. I believe her husband's name was Percy. Mm-hmm. Percy Harris, who was an aspiring politician. So she played the dutiful wife. Mm-hmm. And in those times, women were to develop characters of their being. So what that entailed were things like becoming an accomplished painter or studying a new language or becoming cultured through refined feminine pursuits that were perceived as such at the time. Mm-hmm. So I found it really interesting that she found a way to still engage in the fine arts aspect of her pursuits, yet elevate it to a more ambitious place when she reached out to Crowley to illustrate his now great tome that we love and enjoy.
Crowley described the Book of Thoth, the Thoth deck, the Thoth tarot deck, as the vindication of my life's work for the past 44 years, and will be the compass and power of the good ship Magick for the next 2,000 years. And so that's no small undertaking, really.
No, and I found that when we dove into our individual deeper studies of Lady Frieda Harris, we both came across a lot of information on how she was a lot more intellectual about her process when it came to magic or occult workings. Intellectual even in the sense of visualizing compositions mathematically as inspired by the Italian Renaissance. And those great masters were very devoted to, the golden mean and, the mapping out of perspective militantly. So some of that aspect, that mathematical aesthetic, really shines, I find, in the deck. When you look at like such cards as the World, where she has the constellations, the sort of the belt of the constellations.
Yeah, the universe card as the because it's traditionally the world card, and it became the universe card for this in this case. And it's you're right. There's a lot of movement.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest change that's immediately obvious with this deck as compared to some previous decks, and even most decks since, is that there's so much movement in her imagery.
Absolutely. And I found her deck, which is my personal favorite one to read from, and I have plenty that have been given to me over the years, and some of which I've had come to me through various sources. But I've always found that the dynamic movement of her work lends itself greatly to visualization and trance and invoking, intuiting. What I find interesting too, though, is that she herself had a very particular perspective on what the tarot deck's role was. And I'm going to see if I can find that quote that she wrote in one of her letters to Crowley. She said something to the effect of, contrary to everybody's impression of the tarot deck, tarot cards were not intended for the purpose of divination. They are a map of the universe, and they might quite easily be compared to the symbols of mathematics. Regarded as such, they represent convenient means of stating cosmic problems. I have made an effort in the present pack to embody this current mode of the century. Therefore, I have tried to introduce among the cards an element of time in nearly all of the designs. The straight line of the former cards, such as the check patterns, the rays of the sun, the chart of the universe and the stars, expressed as curves. I hope to convey the idea of movement. This really means that you can look at any of the pictures thinking in what I may describe as 4 dimensions. This requires great concentration and is an incentive to meditation.
And she certainly achieved that. I mean, the sense of movement in each of the cards really helps to remind us that there's that whole idea of the tarot being also the rota, the wheel.
Absolutely.
And it feels like each card wants to move on to the next and that sort of thing. So,
and it's interesting, too, because I've heard many different occultists speak of the tarot deck as a grimoire of sorts. Thinking in particular of Frater S., who has talked about the tarot major arcana in particular almost as a occult equivalent of the Stations of the Cross. Where you meditate from, preconception through the stations of the mysteries of life unto the end and afterlife. And I always thought it would be really cool to do a massive hallway, like a labyrinth of sorts, with the major arcana as an installation piece larger than life size.
I remember living with a bunch of people who were very much into the BOTA, and they had gotten some giant size tarot trumps done up. I don't remember if they had all of them. I think they had all of them. And they would do these tarot circles, and they would put up the one that they were discussing for the tarot circle and that sort of thing. And they were really beautiful, but it would be great to do something like that, or even,
Absolutely,
even more so.
It's interesting too, because having come across some of the same sources that we've reflected on with Lady Frieda Harris, you recognize there was this one point where Crowley was really pushing her to quote unquote make a neutral tarot deck so that people can get lost in the meditation. But what I find so comical about that is that she very pointedly comes back at Crowley and says, I will be doing nothing of the sort. Like, I will be creating the tarot deck as my highest self indicates, and that's what you're going to receive.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, by being true to the uniqueness of her aesthetic and approach, I find it still lends, if not more so, to that meditation, because she was so solidly devoted to the uniqueness of her offering aesthetically.
Yeah, what she brought to the table was pretty incredible. I mean, I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about... well, you know what? We intended to start this with a little ode to Mercury, because Mercury was throughout this period when she was working at the Thoth deck, Mercury was very important and forefront in her mind at the time.
Absolutely. He was definitely the archetypal portal that she devoted herself to. And in her Victorian modesty, had come to express to Crowley that she felt that she had not fully reached Mercury to his satisfaction, and therefore he was becoming quite the trickster and wreaking havoc in her process, which, of course, as you know, in the deck, there's like 4 different renditions of the Magus or the magician that she had Mercury be represented in. So yes, if you would do the honors of propitiating our beloved Hermes, Mercury, Thoth, Jehuti, etc.
Jungitur ein vati vates, rex inclute hrabdu, Hermes tuenias, verba nefanda ferens. This was a little phrase included in Grimorum Sanctissimi, which is included with the Paris working, and has a series of indications for how to set up this particular working. And it's got several little mantras, each individually to a separate god.
Yes.
And so we have this one dedicated to Mercury. And the reason we wanted to use this in particular was because this is what Crowley had advised Frieda to use, Lady Frieda.
Yes, in order to kind of quell the wrath of Mercury, who Crowley himself said was the hardest, how did he put it? The hardest to propitiate.
Yes. And the easiest to offend, essentially.
Yes. So I think it's just a testament to the divine shapeshifter quality and psychopomp that Mercury is.
Yeah.
In all of his holy glory. So we definitely, in this edition, deeply honor his blessings of the quicksilver power. Yeah.
Incidentally, we've got Mercury and Thoth looking down on us in statue form. And I burned a little incense for Mercury earlier and did a little invocation to set us up so that we felt pretty good to go.
Excellent. That is great.
And there was that difficulty getting that Mercury card down. And so, which I guess isn't Of all the cards for the Book of Thoth, that's the one you got to get right. So you got to take however many times, however many shots at it you can.
Absolutely. And I personally find it to be my favorite card in the entire deck.
Mm-hmm.
The one that became the official card is magnificent, but the other efforts were just as fascinating.
Yeah, which they are included with certain decks when you get them. I think it's like a particular size of deck. I don't know if it's the same brand as the usual, all the other decks, or if it's a separate brand or whatever. But
yeah, I wonder about that. As we're going deeper, I did want to just give people a little bit of a background of who Lady Frieda Harris was, because very little is known about her. She was extremely private. Off the top, very much like we did with Dion Fortune, I wanted to share with everyone that she was born in 1877, August 13th, 1877. And she did come, of course, from, I don't want to say like a well-off family, but definitely they were comfortable. There wasn't anything in her path that had suffering in its way to her expression. And she, because of her intellectual pursuits in terms of her reading material, she had like a Catholic kind of bent to her reading materials, which attracted the interest of her future husband, Percy Harris.
And when you say a Catholic bent, I mean, I take that as meaning universal rather than what, often people might have associations with.
Yeah, so they shared a lot of intellectual materials back and forth, almost as a form of courting each other. And again, I think that's lending a little bit of a insight into Lady Frieda Harris's nature. First and foremost, being very solar in her consciousness, very intellectual, very much
Leo.
Yeah, she was a Leo, so very, very much not afraid to bring logic and facts into the process. She felt more comfortable in that realm than when later on in her one-on-one studies with Crowley, they started to get more deeper into this sort of intuitive mysteries and the meditations, and then you start to see, like, she starts to get a little shifty in her seat, a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that's common enough for, especially for those of us with an intellectual bent. Once you're taken outside of that comfort zone and you have to try and engage with the intuition, it's a little difficult.
Which is ironic because she is a painter. She's an artist. So she did work very much with feel and form, space, composition, intuition. But I don't think she felt very comfortable calling it that.
Yeah.
She liked to see all of these lines and forms as symbolic representations of nature, the science of nature. The science of nature, the language of nature.
Yeah, it seemed like she wanted to always bring things back to the painting, and maybe it was like an intuitive sense that that's what she needed to do, you know?
Well, one of the one of the contemporaries of her world that influenced her was, of course, the great mystic of the 20th century, Rudolf Steiner, who was very famous for creating many, many modes of thought and protocol for people that wanted to expand themselves spiritually outside of the usual dominant religions. So he's the one that was famous for anthroposophy, for eurythmy, for creating the Waldorf school, for bringing into consciousness people's deeper scientific and mystical relationship to nature by turning back to biodynamic farming practices when they worked with the earth, so that how you worked with the earth was in synchronicity with the phases and signs of the moon that change and shift every 2.5 days. And he would conduct scientific experiments to prove that our alignment with the cosmos actually has a scientifically measurable result in food yielding, like in what we yield in our gardens. Of course, with the initial inspiration being how to liberate ourselves from the harsh times that came with the depression to follow and everything, right?
Yeah.
To kind of try to stave those things off. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because Lady Frieda Harris was very much interested in anthroposophy, which is, and I quote, a research philosophy of social and spiritual intuition that gave primacy to developing the faculties of imagination via open and honest analytical methods.
Interesting. I like that. I think it's funny because my mind's going to something completely, seemingly unrelated, but it's going to Nietzsche.
Oh, of course.
And the fact that Nietzsche was trying to point out the fact that when we just have the intellect running the show, we end up with dead matter.
Absolutely.
And what we need was some kind of re-engagement with that intuition and that, the other parts of ourselves.
I really feel her art gave her that freedom to flow with her intuition, even if she didn't feel comfortable saying that.
Yeah.
She was very, very Victorian in many ways and kept that kind of personal feeling close to her chest.
We talked about that, right? Because there's some anecdotes related to her where, she had direct personal exchanges, like she would meet with Crowley and she would pay him in order to help him survive because he was struggling much. And she paid him for spiritual teaching, which is actually kind of proscribed by the AA, really. So it's not really correct to be accepting money for spiritual teaching. However, it was just basically a means, probably more for Percy,
right?
Than it was for anything else. Yeah. But it was just to help Crowley stay afloat and that sort of thing. But she spent a lot of time in his presence and sharing ideas and learning directly from him. And I'm sure he was also gaining quite a bit from her presence as well, of course. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah. I think she was, as you had mentioned when we were chatting a little earlier, she's a bit of a hothead to match Crowley. And so I thought it was interesting that...
It's really great because there was a point of time where Crowley was like, could you not just paint the female figure a little bit more like Aubrey Beardsley did?
Oh, I love that.
And there was this whole diatribe that unfolded in a letter after that request. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I have a little quote from that, as a matter of fact, because I just love it. It's delicious. She says, "Know what you won't do shall be the whole of my law. I can bear many things, chiblains included." I forgot to look up chiblains, whatever the heck that means. "But I will not draw a lady like Aubrey Beardsley."
Yeah. She basically shut it down. It's just like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Don't think so. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I love that. And they had these constant, like, feisty crashes, and then each saw the other as insufferable, and then they would come back to each other. And she had a deep respect for Crowley.
And I love there's the anecdote about she had been setting up exhibitions, and Crowley wasn't being kept in the loop, and it's completely reasonable. You can see both sides of the story. You can see completely why she's trying to do things the way she's doing them, because Crowley's got an infamous name, and she's got to keep, if she wants to keep sponsors for the exhibitions and for the cards in general, then she's got to try and keep those two things separate and keep his name kind of on the down low. And meanwhile, he's feeling like he's being shut out and excluded from it. So it's like a difficult situation in that sense, and you can see both sides of it.
Yes, and we're talking in particular about like when a great amount of the paintings were finally complete. It was a project that was supposed to take 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But it ended up being closer to like 5 years or so,
Yeah.
if not longer,
Yeah.
to complete. And all the while, she had to hear the ragings of the Second World War
Yeah.
around her while she was like, she had this little, just to backtrack, because of who she was as the loyal wife of a politician, she had her duties as a wife that she felt were a little bit of a weight on achieving artistic things. So she had to whisk herself away to a private cabin, I believe, and really focus on the great work without distraction.
Yeah.
So she went deeply into hermitage, and really in a very devoted kind of way slogged away at these works with a great mission, a great sense of mission. Every so often having to, have Crowley come in and check in on her and, okay, how are your magical studies going? And did you do yoga today? Did you meditate? Did you, He would teach her all sorts of tools of the path, of course, gematria, astrology.
And at one point she had to focus on a specific form of divination. Ironically, she did not choose the tarot.
No, she did not.
This is for the AA path, which she was an AA member, working her way through that. And at one point, you have to choose a form of divination to go with, and she chose the Yi King or Yi Ching, and which makes sense because it would appeal to her intellectual bent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she also, by the way, I believe, was exposed to Buddhist concepts through her mother. So she had a resonance from a very young age with Eastern philosophy and thought. So it makes sense that she would drift toward that. She didn't quite find herself fond of other representatives of deity. Like I know that in one of my readings of her letters, she was expressing something about, I'm not really down with Egyptian gods. And I was like, sacrilege. But I find it great that she was very candid about things like that.
Yeah.
She had no fear to just really put it out there with Crowley.
That's an interesting subject too, because when it comes to different deities or different cultural backgrounds or backdrops for these things, I think a lot of people do run into trouble with trying to connect with, for instance, Egyptian deities.
Yes.
And they might end up instead trying to go to something a little more Celtic or a little more, Eastern or what have you. But,
right. There was a quote about that somewhere I read. I just can't recall where, but you get the gist of her letters back and forth with Crowley being both very heated, but then also very tender and respectful. And she genuinely felt that because of her station in life, a lot of her opportunities to develop spiritually were stifled. Just having such a straight-laced sort of position in society with all of its expectations. I'm not saying it's a hardship. I'm saying it has its duties.
Yeah.
And she felt that with the emphasis of that so strong in her life, that she was neglectful of her inner spiritual world until she painted.
Yeah, I mean, she was described as uneducated, and I think she was, in a way, kind of a relic of that old Victorian world of women being raised to have certain special skills and emphasize those, but not to be educated, not to be self-empowered, but to essentially be in service as a wife and a mother and that sort of thing.
Yet what I find so amazing is that she was the complete antithesis of that in her private life, because I believe in one of the periodicals, it was stating something to the effect that when her estate was, being dealt with after her death, there was evidence of of Masonic regalia and paraphernalia in her keeping, there were indications that she was a co-mason, I believe.
Yeah, it seemed like that was kind of, there wasn't direct evidence if it was a co-mason or if it was, there's a different branch that women could be a part of.
I think it
as
had to
well.
do with just where a woman's place
Yeah.
in that order would be. So for me to think of her as uneducated seems preposterous. Like, you cannot be in the presence of this kind of secret order without being like a highly intelligent individual.
Yeah.
And, given her background, she had a lot of exposure to educational opportunities that perhaps others that were less fortunate did not have, in terms of their financial station or class or whatever. So I just don't accept this image of Lady Frieda Harris being uneducated. I think that's a kind of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I think if anything, it's more indicatory of the English class system and the way that people were viewed. You don't have, you didn't go to Trinity, Cambridge College, so or Oxford or whatnot.
Right.
But yeah, as far as the Masonry thing goes, and there was also the fact that because she was also a member of the OTO, and when she joined the OTO, she was given an equivalency to a degree because she already had an existing Masonic standing.
Exactly,
So, yeah.
yes. And Crowley definitely considered her as one of the few people that he had very deep respect for.
Yeah, I love the fact that the little anecdote of one of the exhibitions that she had put on and Crowley had not been told about, and so he happened to go by and discover it, and he went there fuming and wanting to confront her, and she was when she saw him there, she was all flustered, but he was really pleased at how well it was put together.
It's like, this show looks amazing. But anyway, as I was saying, how dare you?
I just love the fact that he was able to concede the fact that, oh no, actually this is okay. This is really well done, so I'm really happy with this. So
what was it like? The Ace of Swords card or something was in the window, and he was like, "What?" So I find the humanity of their relationship really endearing,
and the fact that they were so close right up until Crowley's death, and thereafter she still. There was that point in time when she made a little comment. I should rephrase that maybe. When she went and saw Kenneth Anger's film.
Oh, absolutely. The inauguration of the Pleasure Dome.
In 1954.
Yes.
She was furious.
Yes.
Because she saw it as a betrayal of their friend. And saw it as just trying to make it seem lurid and farcical and just, not representing it correctly.
Well, and it's ironic to me because, like, Lady Frieda Harris may be turning in her grave hearing me say this, but I absolutely love a lot of the aesthetics and visuals and reverence that I see in a lot of Kenneth Anger's work. With regards to the high arts through film, the capturing of the ambiance of ritual, of symbolism, of form, of line, of composition. I mean, the very thing that Lady Frieda Harris was doing in her own way on canvas, but I feel that he definitely was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He was ahead of his time. So.
And I think she had a hard time in her old Victorian style way of being able to, look at the Californians.
Yes, I consider it, as we mentioned earlier, a form of cultural dissonance. Yeah. And as you know, at some point once the OTO became defunct, I believe 1947-ish, something like that. I cannot remember exactly. However, it was at that point that she was being asked to come to the United States. Knowing everyone was in awe, of course, like she's Lady Frieda Harris. She worked one-on-one with Crowley. They did the deck together. We should have her here as a, an exalted Thelemite, which she didn't relate to, and to speak of women's role in Thelema in the new aeon. And she was extremely uncomfortable with that. And she never did take on that invitation.
Yeah, and there's what she was saying about that made me think that it seemed as though maybe she had a lot of confidence issues because of having been the wife in support of this political husband, acutely feeling her lack of education because of the fact that probably everybody is telling her that she's not educated, and then that kind of thing can psychologically mess you up. So I think the way she was looking at it was, I'm going to go tell these educated women what they should think, and I'm going to try and represent this thing to them. I think it was probably like a self-confidence,
Well, and you also have the admission of her own heart that she did not consider herself to be a good pupil of Crowley, in the sense that she was very much resistant to perhaps what she may have even perceived as orthodoxy within Thelema, like the protocols, the observances, the rituals, the this, the that, which she personally, in some letters, out and out says they are of no use to me. I find my spiritual place where I'm alive when I'm weaving visions through the surface of a canvas or what have you.
Yeah, which I think is really beautifully Thelemic right there.
This is why I find her to be such a complex and fascinating character, because seemingly one thing's presented and then you understand there are so many more layers to her achievements. I mean, before she met Crowley, she was regularly illustrating her own, as I mentioned earlier, folk tales. I cannot remember. I think it was in the 1920 or 1825 or something.
Oh, 1926, there was a book she published.
Oh, that's it. Sorry. She was born in 1877. Before her birth. What an achievement.
Really ahead of her time.
Way ahead of her time. So, correction, in
1926.
She had...
I was just going to say, she published a book called Winchelsea. I think that's the pronunciation of that.
Or Winchelsea.
Yeah.
Which is what you just said.
Winchelsea. Winchelsea! The British can cringe and... but yeah, so it was an illustrated book combining mythology and nature mysticism.
Absolutely.
It was regarding the god Dionysus.
And she was very fascinated by him. So, I mean, it's the antithesis of intellect, if you think about it. He was extremely, as everyone knows, primal force of nature.
Yeah.
A chthonic churning in the cauldron of the unknown. And I mean, that's very much what we do when we're artists. It is a form of tapping into source or leaving oneself open as a vessel for the greater cosmic voice of eternity to speak to us in the microcosm. So, I mean, that is an extreme, for me, it's akin to a magician, the witch, the occultist that is the seer or an oracle or any of a host of an alchemist. It's simply semantics to just say, oh, I'm not a Thelemite, the way she did. Like, she just did not like the overcoat that was Crowley was trying to throw onto her. It's like, no, I'm devoted to the preservation of your legacy and our co-conspiracy here, artistically. But that's where her primary devotion resided.
Yeah, that's the difficulty of this, is that I think when it comes to art, there's a common tendency to, like, I remember, okay, just to simplify what I'm trying to say, I remember specifically a couple of friends years ago who had an argument, evidently, over whether or not art was magic. Like, doing art was performing magic.
Right.
And so the one person was fiercely, no, it's not, that's not performing magic. And I think his point was that it's important to take seriously what you have to, the steps involved in doing magic and actually doing magic, and not just coming up with some escapist attempt to say, oh, I'm doing magic, but not actually doing all the work that's involved with magic. And I think that's where he was coming from.
I see. It's kind of ironic, though, because as an artist, one must be properly prepared.
Absolutely.
And there are many, many steps where one can very consciously invoke the process of visualizing, manifesting, invoking, etc., as magical practices that are not separate from when you're casting a circle and doing your personal work in relation to the macrocosm. I see these things as bleeding into each other as one force. Like, people feel compelled to separate those things, but I find the deeper you go into your occult practices, your true magical practices, all of these dimensions that are seemingly separate start to bleed together as one current.
I agree 100%. And I think that's probably why somebody like Lady Frieda Harris would have had difficulty marrying the two ideas, that you'd have, on the one hand, you'd have this structured sort of approach, and then on the other hand, she was saying, I can't do it that way, but I can just do it in art. Let me do it in art.
Yes.
Because
yes.
I think doing art is like it's a pure way of channeling where you can lose yourself in channeling, and you don't, because you can lose yourself, and because generally it's easy, it can be difficult for people to have a self-consciousness of what's going on while that channeling's taking place. That's the difficulty that they have in trying to parse what it is they're, when you're saying, well, I can't do it that way, but I can do it with art.
Well, it's interesting because for myself, a lot of my visions do come from the dream world, which is, that connection to the primal source of all. And when it comes through in my creation as an artist, or even as a martial artist, or as an occult practitioner, a witch, whatever overcoat someone wants to throw onto my process, it doesn't separate itself from each other. It's all interconnected. I can easily enter a trance and then start to channel things within a properly prepared circle and what have you. When I do art, I actually do prepare. Or, even if I'm like trancing out and doing a preliminary sketch on something, I definitely have to be within a certain sacred space within myself to even receive that, So my entire being is the temple and the preparation. It's not to exclude myself from other, protocols of magic and preparation. It's not to exclude myself from the inner workings and the ecosystem of what one must do in a magical circle or working. It's just that it's not just relegated to that spot. I think as you go deeper with more experience, it bleeds into everything. Yeah,
I think the person I was thinking of who was arguing for the idea that art was a form of magic was also doing magic practices and ritual and whatnot as well. So it wasn't a case of like, I'm already doing magic, so I don't need to do all that stuff. It was, this is one other facet of this thing.
And it's interesting. This theme seems to come up a lot in some of the future women of the occult that I wish to bring into the equation, that are very similar in that sense of like the art and the trance of art is the magic. And we'll kind of leave those names in the hidden realms to come. But when we do get there, the connections will be made very clear. It's an intriguing subject.
Yeah. I think art is one of the greatest ways to engage with magic because, in fact, I feel like a lot of the time I'll have a lot more difficulty with ceremonial magic and with, yoga practices and that sort of thing, trying to get into the states that you're attempting to achieve. Doing them through art can, like in my case, it would more often than not be music. I do some drawing as well, and there's an invocatory thing going on there as well. But with music, it's not good unless it's invoking something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you get that moment where the process kicks into overdrive, and the process has you now. And you're surfing that cosmic wave. Yeah,
I think a lot of people like to call it the zone. But yeah, it's that state. It becomes like this tunnel vision where you just lose yourself and you're in it.
And so for me, I think that was Lady Frieda Harris's zone. And when she was invoking the cards in her paintings, which are absolute masterpieces, every single one of them, I feel that she came at them like a portal into another reality, which is what, it's a doorway.
Yeah.
It's what art does.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when it comes to something like the tarot. It's interesting because Crowley originally met Lady Frieda Harris in 1937 at a dinner of some sort, and they had a mutual friend who introduced them. And so it wasn't long before she was, doing AA work and that sort of thing. And Crowley actually recommended that she paint the tarot as an exercise. I think that's how this originally came to be, and then it started to snowball.
Yeah, and she took on the enthusiasm of that really intensely.
Yeah. So I don't know that either of them really had any thought that it was going to be such a big thing as it turned out to be. It was really just her chant. He was suggesting that, this would be a good way to engage with it. Just, try painting it and see what you come up with.
Absolutely. And she definitely attributes her alchemy with Crowley as a unit to finally providing the realm in which she could really let her visions loose as she always wished to let them loose.
Yeah.
And the cards are a testament to that. They're very extremely complex, sublime. The color usage is definitely aware of higher spiritual principles and the impact of color theory and space, and it's clear she is extremely intelligent and very spiritually intuitive with her work. So
it's interesting as well that Crowley himself is a painter and had done a lot of oil painting and whatnot. So it's nice to think about that. It wasn't just that he was, here, you take this on because you're the artist here. It was like, no, you're the better one to handle this. I have to
say, I'm extremely relieved that Crowley did that because, with all due respect to Crowley, I'm not a big fan of his art.
Fair enough, yeah. I think that's probably a sentiment that a lot of people would share.
There would be a lot of Thelemites out there who would be like, oh my God! But no, with all due respect, it was very wise of him to have Lady Frieda Harris take it on. yeah, so in that moment where so you backtrack and you think of her saying of herself, well, I'm an extremely intellectual person. I have this process, that process. But when she declined the invitation to speak in 1954 at a university about women's place in the new aeon, as we mentioned earlier, her letters to Crowley revealed that she was most comfortable with the reactions that children had to her work, who were not trying to over-intellectualize her work, and would come to her intuitively and say, tell me more about the lust card.
Yeah, what's your favorite card?
Yeah, they would pick that one.
Yeah.
And again, the complexity of herself presenting as this, intellectual but uneducated, and
Yeah.
and oh, my intuition's not. But meanwhile, like everything that she does, everything that she's drawn to, it reveals a contrary aspect to her
that's
nature.
why I think there's the confidence thing that you can see there, because I recognize it for my own self and in other people as well, where it's that you're worried that other people, I guess people think of it as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I don't think is actually accurate, but the way that it's popularly thought of is that there's some people who think that everybody else knows everything that they do, so they kind of downplay themselves and their own intelligence. And then there's other types of people who assume they know everything and other people don't. And so there's that kind of dissonance there. So I think she falls into the former, as I would feel often I end up feeling myself, and a lot of people tend to, where they're lacking that confidence of being able to just own the room, and that's kind of what I sense with her.
It's fascinating because in the grand scheme of things, the magnificent opus of her work speaks for itself as to the majesty of her artistic prowess.
Absolutely.
And her spiritual intuition being way more connected than she gave herself credit for.
Yeah, I think that's the shame of it, just from what we're able to read of her life, is that, like in this case, she's saying that the adults who would be looking at the cards would just be asking to have their fortunes read and this sort of thing. And to her, that was just kind of missing the point entirely, whereas the kids were able to connect with them in an intuitive way. And she
valued that a lot more.
Yeah.
So that's intriguing.
Which I think was like, we were talking about the one essay that we'd both read online that includes a number of, it's on the Brill site, and it's got a number of quotes from her, which I really value, because that's the really interesting factual stuff, the stuff that we can really get at.
The things that we haven't had the privilege to be exposed to because of her being such an enigmatic figure.
Yeah, and then the author of this essay, they're making a thesis here that they're trying to get across. The thesis here is that she was inspired and taught by Crowley, but she wasn't actually engaging with the Thelemic doctrines. No. And to me, I am a little critical of this essay for that reason, because I understand it as an essay as it is, but it's like, and it's fine. Okay, this person has a thesis. They want to present the thesis. I don't find it particularly convincing myself, but then it's like the type of thing where, okay, if this is one of the few scant things that we have to form our image of Lady Frieda Harris based off of, it's unfortunate, because it seems like it's really highly colored by this author's.
I completely agree. And so one of the valuable things I found about what we learned about Lady Frieda Harris in this thesis were the factual things that we didn't know about her privately, but also if you look at the sort of additional sources to look into the relationship between Lady Frieda Harris and Aleister Crowley. It provides excellent references to resources that had letters that they passed between the two of them. And I think that would be really intriguing to go deeper into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because those were the highlights for me.
Absolutely.
Of the nature and brilliance of Lady Frieda Harris really speaking on the page.
Yeah. I mean, this author's closing paragraph was, if I can read that, just to give an example, because this sums it up. Instead of becoming a dedicated Thelemite, she finally understood that her true path was the inspiration, concentration, and joy one experienced in painting. And to me, if you're saying that's somehow different than what Thelema is, or the doctrines of Thelema, then you're not quite understanding what Thelema is, because we're talking about do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. The idea of finding your true will and doing that and nothing else.
Which she fully adhered to.
Mm-hmm. And that sounds like...
Absolutely. And interestingly, that earlier quote that you mentioned about do what I won't do will also be, that was brilliant. So, I mean, if you can not see the pure force of someone being true to their will, being, reflected in that kind of a statement, then, I don't think that Lady Frieda Harris was the simple, demure Victorian woman. I think she definitely had a majesty about her and was a profound force of nature, and is one of my favorite occult artists of all time. Mm-hmm. She's right up there with my sacred, H.R. Giger's and the like. To me, she pierced the veil that deeply, and to this day has an impact with her work through the endless tarot decks that are floating around the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
I would love to be able to see the original paintings.
I know, myself. I was thinking about that too. It sounds like they were actually, a great number of them were done during wartime when there was restrictions on certain materials and stuff like that because of, whatever the term is for that, wartime... Like rationing and that sort of thing, yeah. So as a result, they weren't built to last. Mm-hmm. So that's super unfortunate, and I don't know what state they're in or, where they're at this point.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to receive a peek of those.
Yeah, for sure.
But yes, Lady Frieda Harris, a great and profound artist, and, in my opinion, occult practitioner.
Yeah.
Despite her self-deprecating treatment of her being. And again, as mentioned earlier, this theme of strong intuition and magical working through arts crops up again and again in many women of the occult figures to come.
Yeah. And I love the fact that going back to the first quote I had made today from Crowley, where he's saying, the Thoth deck was the vindication of my life's work for the past 44 years and will be the compass and power of the good ship Magick for the next 2,000 years.
Indeed.
And yeah, and I mean, just to close with a little statement from in a letter from Lady Frieda Harris to Crowley, I am only clear about one thing. I will die trying to see my own guardian angel, and you are a wonderful help and guide, and I am very grateful.
There it is. Long live Lady Frieda Harris.
And she shall.
And her great works.
And yeah, long live her credit for the deck as well. Mm-hmm. It's important to make sure that we actually give credit where credit is due, of course.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Rosemary, for joining me once again.
Thank you.
And we'll continue to celebrate all these wonderful women who have helped keep all this occult flame moving through the aeons.
Yes, the keepers of the sacred hearth. Mm-hmm. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here again. And I look forward to our next chapter of mystery.
And thank you, Mercury.
Hail, Mercury.
Hail, Mercury.
Mercurius Maximus.
Odin, whatever name I might give thee.
The wondrous.
Okay, 93. Thank you for joining us. Look for Toronto Thelema on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Watch for events in the city. And join us again in the darkly splendid abodes.